Before sunrise, Mary walks barefoot through Uganda's red dust, a basin of sand balanced on her head, and a prayer on her lips. For 10 years, she's mined gold she's never seen, chasing a sparkle that never belonged to her. Every step is pain, every breath a choice between hunger and poison. But one morning, something changes. The earth that took so much gives something back. Not gold from the ground, but gold from within. This is how Mary found her true treasure, and it wasn't the kind that shines. Mary Jo Mohanji wasn't born into mining. She was born into hope. Married young to a man who promised her a life beyond subsistence. 3 children later, Agnes, Joseph, and little Esther. That promise lived in her kitchen, in Air Garden, in the laughter that filled their modest home. Then death came, as it does in places where healthcare is a luxury. Tuberculosis took her husband in 2009. The world took everything else. By 2010, Uganda's gold rush was transforming Mubinda district. The earth was yielding secrets, and strangers with dreams were arriving daily. Mary heard the stories, women like her, widows and single mothers, earning enough to survive, not thrive. Survive. So she joined the petty workers. That's what they call them, petty. The word itself, a diminishment. These are the women who carry the industry on their heads. Literally. The economics are brutal in their simplicity. 100 Ugandan shillings per trip, about 3 American cents. Carry 50 kilograms of orange sand from pit to processing site. 100 meters, sometimes 500. Repeat. 100 trips to earn enough for posho and beans. To keep Agnes in school, 2-banded Joseph's foot when he steps on rusted metal. To tell Esther, no, we can't afford sugar this week. Mary's hands tell the story, her mouth won't. Blisters that harden into calluses. Calluses that split and bleed. Blood that mingles with the red earth until you until where the wound ends and the work begins. My hands bleed, but my heart hungers more. I count my children's ribs at night. I count my trips by day. The basin is heavy, heavier than my daughter's questions about why we can't leave. But there's another weight. Mary carries one you can't see in the basin, one that trembles in her hands when she tries to hold a spoon at dinner. Mercury, the ancient alchemist's tool, now the artisanal miner's poison, added to crushed ore, and it binds with gold like magic. Heat the amalgam, and gold emerges pure, while mercury evaporates into lungs, into soil, into rivers. Into bodies. Mary doesn't use mercury herself. The petty workers rarely do. But she works alongside those who do. Breathes what they breathe. Drinks from the same streams that run downstream from processing sites. The symptoms start small, a tremor, headaches, numbness in the fingertips, then memory lapses, mood swings that strain what little family bonds remain. For some women, for others, children born with developmental delays. The world agreed mercury was too dangerous. Uganda agreed, but in Maband, in the pits where survival outweighs safety, mercury still flows, because what choice is there when your child's stomach is empty? Mary wonders sometimes, on her 100th trip of the day, if survival itself has become a luxury she can no longer afford. If the price of feeding her children is becoming her future. Their future. But she doesn't wonder long, because the basin is waiting. The earth is waiting. And Agnes needs school fees by Friday. This is Mary's story. But it's not hers alone. To understand Mary, we must understand the earth beneath her feet. This land has always held gold, long before borders, before British colonial administrators mapped Uganda into existence. The Bonoro people knew these hills were special. Colonial mining began in earnest in the 1920s. Industrial operations controlled by foreign companies, employing local men as labor. Women were invisible in the official records, though they always worked, crushing or cooking for crews, carrying supplies. The gold flowed outward. The poverty remained. 21st century. Industrial mining had come and gone, leaving scars and shafts. What remained was opportunity for the desperate, artisanal, and small-scale mining. The gold was still there, in smaller concentrations, requiring more labor, less equipment, more determination. 70,000 miners. 15,000 women, numbers that don't capture the children fed, the school fees paid, the medical bills that might get covered. Numbers that don't capture Mary, but numbers do tell other stories. The environmental cost: forests cleared for pit access, topsoil eroded into rivers, turning them permanently brown, mercury-laced water flowing downstream to farming communities. The poisoned fish, the contaminated crops, the chain of harm spreading outward like cracks in glass. This is the paradox of artisanal mining. It lifts individual families from destitution while potentially impoverishing whole communities. It empowers women economically while exposing them to violence, exploitation, and toxic metals. It feeds children today while potentially poisoning them tomorrow. Mariana Salih, from Global Rights Alert, has worked in these communities for years. She says it plainly. The gold flows out, the poverty stays in, and the women carry everything. The economy on their heads, their families on their backs, and the blame on their shoulders when something goes wrong. Before 2018, Uganda's mining laws barely acknowledged women's existence in the sector. No gender considerations. No recognition of the unique challenges women faced. No protections against the sexual violence that mining communities knew was rampant but rarely discussed. And then came 2016. The year everything changed. The year Mary learned that even the earth beneath her feet wasn't hers to stand on. The government declared new protected areas. Foreign investors secured large-scale licenses. Local communities received notice, sometimes only days in advance, sometimes none at all. The soldiers came at midnight. Mary woke to the sound of bulldozers. It's a sound that haunts her still. The mechanical roar that says civilization is coming to erase you. May 2016. The Mubin district evictions. Over 1,000 families, given mere hours to evacuate. Mine shafts sealed with concrete. Processing sites demolished. Homes in the immediate area marked for clearance. Mary ran. Not away from danger. She had nowhere safe to go. She ran toward the pit, to salvage tools, to grab the basin that represented weeks of saved wages. She ran toward her livelihood as it was being buried. The authorities said it was for safety. Illegal mining. Environmental protection. Investor rights. The words meant nothing to Mary as she watched her survival disappear under rubble. Everything she'd built over 6 years. Every connection to buyers. Every understood rhythm of where to dig, when to process, how to maximize each trip, gone. In the mining communities, they call these evictions the burial. Because it's not just pits they seal, it's futures. Agnes stopped attending school. The fees were suddenly impossible. Joseph joined Mary, looking for work. Any work. A 12-year-old's childhood traded for his sister's potential survival. Little Esther stopped asking for things, learned that wanting was dangerous. But the crackdown didn't just steal livelihoods. It exposed something uglier. Something the mining communities had whispered about, but rarely confronted head-on. The night of the eviction, Mary heard screaming from a neighboring shelter. A woman she knew, Catherine, a mother of 4, being assaulted by men who knew the police wouldn't come. Who knew that in the chaos, violence becomes invisible. Sexual violence in mining communities isn't an anomaly. It's endemic. 53% of women in artisanal mining across Africa report experiencing it, according to studies. The actual number, almost certainly higher. Because shame is silent, because reporting systems don't exist, because survival means swallowing your trauma and moving forward. Mary couldn't stop Catherine's assault, couldn't stop the eviction, couldn't stop the bulldozers. But standing there in the wreckage of her livelihood, something crystallized, a question formed that wouldn't leave her alone. Why do we accept this? The authorities said the eviction was necessary. But necessary for whom? The investors who got the land licenses. The politicians who got investment agreements. Not for Mari. Not for the 15,000 women whose labor built Uganda's gold sector while their names appeared on no official registries. No benefit schemes. No protection protocols. The 2003 Mining Act. Barry mentioned artisanal miners. The 2014 Minerals Policy. Women received exactly 3 references, all as vulnerable groups needing undefined support. Not as workers, not as economic actors, as charity cases. Mary walked away from that pit, carrying more than loss. She carried a seed of something the authorities hadn't anticipated. Rage that might become resistance. Mary found work again. She had too, but the new sites were different, less regulated, which meant more dangerous, more mercury use, less oversight, the trade-off of desperation. Mercury. Let's talk about what this actually means for human bodies, for women's bodies. Specifically, elemental mercury evaporates at room temperature. Heated during gold processing, it vaporizes faster. Inhaled, it enters the bloodstream within seconds. The body doesn't distinguish between useful minerals and toxic metals. It absorbs what comes. For women of reproductive age, mercury is particularly devastating. It crosses the placental barrier, meaning pregnant women expose their unborn children. It concentrates in breast milk. It disrupts menstrual cycles, increases miscarriage rates, causes developmental delays in children. Grace Namilai noticed the symptoms first, tremors in her hands, so severe she couldn't braid her daughter's hair. Headaches that lasted for days. Then numbness, creeping up her arms. By the time she sought medical care, the damage was irreversible. Peripheral neuropathy, nerve damage that means chronic pain for the rest of her life. She was 28 years old. Rebecca Nankia lost 3 pregnancies in 2 years, each one ending in the second trimester, with no clear medical explanation until a visiting health worker tested the river water downstream from processing sites. Mercury levels 40 times higher than World Health Organization's safety standards. The river where Rebecca washed clothes, where her family drew drinking water, where children played. Poisoned, but mercury's reach extends beyond miners' bodies. The environmental contamination creates ripples. Rivers carry the metal downstream for kilometers. Farmers' irrigation systems draw contaminated water. Crops absorb mercury through roots. Fish bioaccumulated in their tissue. And people who've never touched gold in their lives find themselves mercury poisons through their food. The environmental destruction tells another story. Mavin's forests are vanishing. Trees felled for pit supports, for fuel, for temporary shelter. The topsoil, formed over thousands of years, washed into rivers in months. What remains is eroded landscape, red scars across green hills, gullies carved by rain, laterite stone exposed like bone through skin. The land remembers, even after mining stops. The land remembers. Rehabilitation takes decades, an investment these communities will never see. For Mary, the costs were multiplying in ways that had nothing to do with economics. Agnes was showing signs of mercury exposure, difficulty concentrating, mood swings. Joseph had developed a persistent cough from dust exposure when he tried mining briefly. And Esther had stopped speaking much at all. Mining doesn't just extract gold. It extracts connection. Mary was absent 14 hours a day. Exhaustion meant she had no patience for children's needs. When she returned, the trauma she carried, from Abiktian, from witnessing violence, from daily degradation, manifested as distance. Families fracture under this pressure. Marriages dissolve. Children drift toward their own survival strategies, sometimes into mining themselves, sometimes into worse alternatives. I lost my child in the 6th month. The doctor said environment. What environment? This is the only life I know. My husband left. Said I chose gold over family, but he never chose between feeding children and keeping his dignity. That choice is mine alone. I shake now. In the morning when I wake, my hands shake. My daughter asks if I'm cold. I tell her yes, but I'm not cold. I'm poisoned. The land where I grew up is red mud now. No trees. My children will never climb what I climbed, never drink from the stream that raised me. I'm 31 years old. I feel 70. My back, my hands, my lungs, everything hurts. And still I dig, because pain is a luxury next to hunger. These are the hidden costs of gold. The price tag's never calculated in market value. The depreciation of human bodies, family bonds, environmental futures. When does poison become a prison? When you can't imagine any other way to survive. But even prisons have cracks where light enters. Even poison has antidotes, though they require courage to swallow. Mary was about to discover that her voice, the one she'd learned to silence, to make small, to apologize for, might be the most valuable thing she'd ever mined. October 2016. 5 months post-eviction. A woman named Judith organized the first meeting. No permits, no official recognition. Just women gathering to speak truths they'd each been carrying alone. Mary almost didn't attend. What could talking change? But Agnes had asked her a question the night before that she couldn't answer. Mama, why do we accept this? The same question, crystallizing in her daughter's mind. The same question spreading like underground water through cracked stone. They shared stories. Catherine spoke about the assault. Her voice shook, but she spoke. Rebecca described her miscarriage. Grace showed her trembling hands. Woman after woman, revealing wounds they'd thought were uniquely theirs, only to discover they were systematically everyone's. This is how movements begin, not with grand declarations, but with the radical act of speaking pain aloud and having it witnessed, believed, validated. I thought I was failing my children, failing as a woman, failing at survival. But maybe, maybe the system is failing us. The question shifted everything. If the failure was systemic, individual shame became collective outrage. If the problem was structural, solutions required coordination, not just personal resilience. They decided to form a caucus, an informal women's group to advocate for basic rights. Right to safe working conditions. Right to be consulted before evictions. Right to access medical care for mining-related health issues. Right to exist in the sector without fear of violence. The demands sound modest. That's what 90 years of exclusion does. Makes basic dignity seem like ambitious advocacy. The caucus met weekly. Membership grew from 12 to 30 to 80 women. They faced resistance. Husbands who didn't want wives organizing. Mining bosses who saw collective action as threat. Local officials who dismissed them as troublemakers, but they persisted. Small victories emerged. A local dialogue between miners and one sympathetic district official resulted in advance notice for future evictions. 2 weeks instead of 2 days. A health organization, hearing about their organizing, conducted free mercury testing, small cracks in the wall of indifference. Then, in early 2017, they caught a break that would change everything. Global Rights Alert, an international organization working on extractives governance, was launching something called the Golden Voices Project. Golden Voices aimed to amplify women's participation in mining policy. It had funding, government backing, and most critically, access to national policymakers. They were looking for community partners. Judith heard about it and knew immediately. This was the bridge they needed. Maria Nassali, from Global Rights. Alert sat in a circle with Mary and 30 other women in March 2017. She asked a simple question. If you could tell policymakers one thing about your lives, what would it be? Mary stood. Her hands shook, but this time not from mercury exposure, from the terror and power of being truly heard. Tell them we exist. We're not ghosts. We're not margins in their reports. We feed this country's children while mining its gold, and we will not be buried alive anymore. It was a breakthrough moment, the kind that changes internal geography. Mary discovered she had a voice that could demand, not just a request. A voice that carried authority born of experience, not granted by credentials. Over the next months, Global Rights Alert provided crucial support, training in advocacy, documentation of rights violations, legal literacy, policy analysis. They helped the women understand the Byzantine world of mining governance, the ministries, committees, regulations that determined their fates while remaining incomprehensible. Knowledge is power, they say. But knowledge applied collectively, that's something else entirely. The caucus evolved into something more formal. The Mubend Women Miners Association, they elected leadership, opened a bank account with pooled dues, created a crisis response fund for members facing medical emergencies or eviction. But grassroots organizing only goes so far. Policy change requires access to power, and power in Uganda meant Parliament, the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, the rooms where men in suits decided the futures of women in dust. Those doors were locked. Security guards, appointment requirements, bureaucratic labyrinths, designed to filter out the inconvenient voices of the governed. The first attempt to meet policymakers failed. The second attempt resulted in a 5-minute courtesy meeting with a junior staffer who took notes but promised nothing. The third attempt, the door wasn't even answered. Discouragement is the weapon of the status quo. Make change seem impossible, and people stop trying. But Mary and her sisters had survived things much harder than closed doors. They'd survived mercury, eviction, violence, poverty. They would not be deterred by architecture. Global Rights Alert helped them understand leverage. Direct access to ministers was difficult, but indirect access through media, civil society coalitions, sympathetic members of parliament, international pressure. That was possible. They began appearing on local radio programs, telling their stories not as victims, but as economic actors, being denied their rights. The framing mattered. Victims get charity. Economic actors get policy reform. They wrote open letters to newspapers, formed alliances with environmental groups who cared about mercury contamination, connected with international mining justice networks who could amplify their demands beyond Uganda's borders. And slowly, reluctantly, the doors began to crack open. A parliamentary committee on natural resources agreed to a public hearing. The women prepared for months, gathering testimonies, compiling health data, documenting eviction cases, rehearsing their presentations. Mary was chosen to testify. She'd never been inside a government building before. The marble floors, the air conditioning, the suited officials. It was designed to intimidate, and it worked, initially. But then she remembered the women watching from the gallery. She remembered Agnes asking why they accepted injustice. She remembered Catherine's screams during the eviction. She remembered Grace's trembling hands. She remembered Rebecca's lost children. And she spoke, not politely, not apologetically. She spoke with the full weight of 15,000 invisible women behind her voice. Honorable members, you speak of Uganda's mining potential. You invite investors. You sign contracts worth millions. But you've never asked us, the women who've mined this gold for generations, what we need to survive, what we make you rich. You evict us without compensation. You ignore our health crises. You allow violence against us to go unpunished. You write policies as if we don't exist. And then you wonder why poverty persists. We are not asking for charity. We are demanding recognition. We are the backbone of this sector. Treat us like it, or watch as we organize ourselves into a force you can no longer ignore. The room was silent. Some officials looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry. But a few, a crucial few, looked convinced. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Multiple women testified. The committee members asked questions, some dismissive, others genuine. By the end, there were commitments to investigate, to consult, to consider. It wasn't victory yet, but it was possibility. Mary left Parliament that day, understanding something fundamental. Power doesn't concede without pressure, but pressure, applied strategically and collectively, can move mountains, or at least move ministries. The fight was just beginning. The months following the parliamentary hearing were a whirlwind of organizing, lobbying, and strategic pressure. The women's testimonies had created cracks in the policy edifice. Now they needed to drive wedges into those cracks before they sealed over. The Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development was drafting a new national minerals policy. Global Rights Alert arranged stakeholder consultation meetings. The association mobilized women from multiple districts, not just Muband, but Bisia, Karamoya, Buwayu. The issue wasn't local, it was national. The bureaucrats resisted. Initially, consultations are often theater, boxers checked without meaningful input incorporated. But the women had learned to be strategic. They didn't just complain about problems. They came with solutions. Establish gender quotas for mining committees. 30% minimum women's representation. Mandate mercury phase-out with transition support. For affected miners, not immediate bans that push people to illegal alternatives, but gradual elimination with safer technology alternatives provided. Create licensing pathways for artisanal miners. Most women worked in legal limbo. Not licensed, not illegal, just invisible. Formalization meant access to services, protections, and recognition. Implement mandatory consultation before evictions, with compensation based on livelihood loss, not just land value. Establish gender-responsive mining health services, mobile clinics for remote sites, regular screenings for mercury exposure, maternal health support. Create violence, prevention, and response mechanisms. Reporting systems that actually work. Protection for women who report assaults. Consequences for perpetrators. The proposals were detailed, practical, and rooted in lived experience. Government officials couldn't dismiss them as uninformed complaints. These were policy solutions from the people who understood the sector's realities better than any consultant report. The advocacy worked in unexpected ways. Some officials were genuinely moved by the women's testimonies and became internal champions. Others responded to international pressure. Donors increasingly demanded gender-responsive extractives governance. Some were swayed by media coverage that made ignoring the issue politically costly. By mid-2018, the draft minerals policy included unprecedented provisions for women miners. Not everything the association requested, but substantial progress. The drafters had borrowed language directly from the women's submissions. Then came the real test. Would the policy be approved? Or would it stall in bureaucratic purgatory like so many well-intentioned drafts before it? The women organized a national campaign. Press conferences, radio interviews, social media pressure. Uganda's digital activists amplified their demands. International solidarity messages from women miners in Tanzania, Ghana, Colombia, Bolivia. The issue gained visibility it had never had before. September 2018. The cabinet approved the national minerals policy. It included gender quotas, mercury reduction targets, licensing reforms, consultation requirements. Not perfect implementation. That would take years of continued pressure, but the foundation was laid. Mary received the news while hauling a basin. Someone ran to the pit shouting that the policy had passed. She set down her load and wept. We did it. We actually did it. Not just Mary. Not just the association, but all of them. Every woman who'd testified, who'd attended meetings, who'd shared her story, who'd refused to stay invisible. The policy victory catalyzed implementation efforts. District governments began forming mining committees with women's representation. The Geological Survey started tracking female miners in official statistics. Training programs launched to help women access licensing. By 2020, over 5,000 women had received formal recognition in the sector. Cooperative models emerged where women pooled resources to own mining sites collectively. Health outreach improved, though mercury remains a persistent challenge. Mary didn't become wealthy. Policy change doesn't work that way. It shifts structures, not individual fortunes overnight. But her working conditions improved. Her voice mattered in decisions about the mining site she worked. When investors came sniffing around for land, there was a consultation process that included her. Most importantly, Agnes stayed in school, and she paid attention to her mother's organizing, saw what collective action could achieve, started asking different questions. Not why do we accept this, but how do we change that? The golden voices had spoken, and Uganda's mining sector would never be quite the same. But Mary's story doesn't exist in isolation. Uganda's women miners are part of a global pattern: extraction economies built on invisible female labor, bearing disproportionate costs, receiving minimal benefits. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, women mine cobalt for our smartphones under similar conditions. Petty workers, carrying heavy loads, exposure to toxic materials, sexual violence as occupational hazard, exclusion from formal sector recognition and benefits. In Bolivia, women miners, called Polaris, have organized cooperatives to claim space in tin and silver mining. They've faced violence, intimidation, dismissal from male-dominated unions, but they've persisted, creating alternative economic structures when existing ones excluded them. In Ghana, Galamsey, women miners face criminalization of their livelihoods while large-scale mining companies devastate environments with impunity. The double standard is stark: women's small-scale mining prosecuted, corporate environmental damage negotiated. In the Philippines, women in mining-affected communities organize against displacement. They defend ancestral lands while mining companies, backed by government permits, boost them out. Their resistance has cost lives. Environmental defenders face assassination with alarming regularity. The pattern repeats across continents. Extractive industries promise development while delivering destruction. Women bear the heaviest burden. Environmental contamination affects their reproductive health, water collection, food production. Displacement disrupts their community networks. Violence targets their bodies as territory to conquer. But resistance repeats too. Women organizing, women documenting, women demanding recognition, women building alternatives. Mary's victory in Uganda inspired women in Kenya to form their own mining association. Her testimony at international conferences on extractives governance gave legitimacy to others demanding space. The ripples spread. Because here is what the gold rush obscures. The real treasure is UND, what we extract from the earth. It's what we build together on its surface. The solidarity, the shared determination. The refusal to accept that some lives matter less than profit margins. Mary understands this now. She speaks at workshops, training new organizers, shares the lessons learned, document everything, build coalitions, use media strategically, never negotiate alone, demand rather than request. Persistence outlasts resistance. She's not naive about the future. Climate change will stress these communities further. Water, scarcity, crop failures, increased competition over dwindling resources. The mining sector will need to transform both its environmental practices and its economic models. Investor pressure continues. International companies want Uganda's gold. They bring jobs, but also displacement. They promise development, but deliver dependency. The women's organizations monitor closely, intervene when necessary, negotiate when possible. Mercury remains the persistent poison. Phase out is slow. Alternatives exist, but require investment these miners can't afford without support. The government's timeline stretches further than the women's bodies can wait. They push for acceleration, and new challenges emerge. Climate adaptation, youth unemployment, pushing young people into mining, conflicts between mining communities and conservation areas. Technology changes in the sector that might exclude women lacking technical training. But Mary has learned something that policy manuals don't teach. Change is never complete. It's continuous. Every victory opens space for new demands. Every gain must be defended while pushing forward. She thinks about legacy now. What will Agnes inherit? Not the mining pits. Those will deplete eventually. But the organizational infrastructure, the knowledge that collective action works, the networks of women who've learned to advocate for themselves. Her daughter wants to study law, specialize in extractives, governance, and women's rights. Mary's gold, refined not into jewelry, but into justice. That's the real revolution. Not just policy changes, but consciousness changes. A generation of girls growing up watching their mothers transform from invisible laborers into political actors, seeing that silence is a choice, not a requirement. understanding that systems bent to exclude them can be bent toward inclusion. Uganda's story is part of a larger story, one being written by women miners in dozens of countries, by indigenous women defending territories, by peasant women protecting seed sovereignty, by factory women organizing for fair wages, by women everywhere refusing the roles assigned to them and insisting on the futures they deserve. The earth has always known women's value. We've tended it, planted it, harvested it, protected it. We've known its rhythms and respected its limits. The extraction economy tried to erase that knowledge, to reduce women to cheap labor or invisible support. But the golden voices are speaking a different truth. One that says, our labor matters. Our health matters. Our voices matter. Our futures matter. And when we speak together, even the deepest silences crack open. Dawn breaks over Muban's red earth. Mary Jo Mohanji walks the familiar path. Down, always down, into what used to be only survival, but has become something more. Something that looks like dignity. The basin still bites into her skull. The work is still brutal. But she doesn't walk alone anymore. She walks with sisters. With recognition. With rights that exist on paper and in practice because she and thousands of other women refuse to stay buried. This is what victory looks like in the real world. Not Hollywood transformation. Not sudden wealth, but incremental gains, hard-won and fiercely defended. But policy provisions that actually mention your existence. But committee seats where you can speak and be heard. But a daughter who believes she can change the world because she watched her mother do exactly that. Golden voices aren't whispers anymore. They're demands. Their testimony. Their policy proposals and media campaigns and international solidarity networks. They read the sound of women who carry economies on their heads, finally being recognized as the economic actors they always were. But the story isn't over. It's never over. Every day brings new challenges. Mercury still poisons. Investors still threaten. Climate change still looms. The work continues. And that's where you come in. Because Mary's story isn't just about Uganda. It's about every extraction economy that profits from invisible labor. It's about every community bearing environmental costs for someone else's gold. It's about every woman told her work doesn't count, her voice doesn't matter, her body is expendable. You can amplify these voices. Share this story. Challenge the industries that profit from exploitation. Demand ethical sourcing from companies selling gold, diamonds, cobalt, lithium. Support organizations like Global Rights Alert doing ground-level advocacy. Push for policy change in your own countries. Investor nations bear responsibility for how their companies behave abroad. If you buy gold, ask where it comes from. Who mined Italiano? Under what conditions? Whether the people who extracted it from the earth received justice along with their wages. If you vote, demand accountability. Foreign aid and investment should require gender equity and environmental protection, not just profit extraction. If you organize, connect. Women miners in Uganda need allies everywhere. Legal support, media amplification, financial solidarity. The networks that help Mary win can help others too. And if you carry your own basin, your own burden that the world refuses to see, know this, your voice matters. Your survival is not a personal failure, but a structural issue. And when we speak together, we crack the silence that keeps us buried. Mary mined gold for a decade before finding her real treasure, her voice and the power it held when joined with others. She refined that gold into something more valuable than jewelry, into justice, into possibility, into a future where Agnes might not have to choose between education and eating. The earth listens when we speak as one, so speak. Organize. Demand. Amplify. Because the golden voices are rising. In Uganda nin, Congo anin. Congo anin. Congo anin. Bolivia. In Ghana. In every place where women's labor builds economies while their names remain invisible. The golden voices are rising, and they will not be buried again. What's your voice fighting for? What's your unbreakable spirit mining? What will you refine from the earth of your experience? Join the dig. The future is waiting to be excavated, and it will take all of us, speaking together, to bring it to light.